Hello and welcome to Lesson 6, Ainsworth's Strange Situation. In this lesson we're going to look at the strange situation, the different stages involved, and then we're going to evaluate it as a method for assessing childhood attachment. So, the strange situation. Strange situation is a laboratory set up to look a bit like a waiting room. There is a comfy chair and some toys for the child to play with. The first step, the mother, baby and experimenter enter the room. This is the familiarization stage. After about a minute, the mother and baby are left alone and the baby is allowed to explore the room and play with the toys. Shortly after, a stranger enters the room and begins to talk to the mum and tries to interrupt the child. Mother leaves the baby and the stranger alone. The baby often becomes distressed at this point and the stranger will try to comfort the baby. Mother then returns and the stranger leaves. And the baby will orientate itself back towards the mother depending on attachment type, and then mother leaves, infant completely alone. Baby is usually distressed by this again. Stage 6, the stranger returns, and then finally the mother returns and the stranger leaves. So at each stage we're assessing separation anxiety experienced by the baby by the mother leaving, stranger anxiety by the presence of a stranger, and based on the observation of how it orientates itself around the room, general orientation towards the mother. So what did Ainsworth find? She found that there are 3 attachment types. Type A, these were anxious avoidant. These children would avoid contact with the mum largely. When the mother left the room, they would get distressed. However, when she returned, they would not seek comfort. Their behaviour was not generally orientated around the mum, though they did resist attempts for the stranger to interact with them. Type B was secure attachment. These were the most abundant in the study. This was characterised by the child getting upset when the mother left and being distressed by the stranger, but also comforted upon mother's return, and they swiftly settled down. Type C were the most interesting in some ways. They were the ambivalent and resistant. They behaved relatively normally in the first stage of the experiment, but when the mum left, they become extremely distressed. And when the mum returned, they would both reject and need her comfort. So many children would be picked up by the mum and they want to be picked up, and as soon as they would push their mum away. So they were torn between this ambivalent, resistant stage where they didn't want mum, but they also desperately needed mum. So the results. Ainsworth found that around 70% of her experimental cohort were classified as type B, secure attachment, leading her to conclude that secure attachment is the most common type and the norm. 15% were type C, these extreme resistant children, and 15% were the avoidant type A. She concluded that what caused these different attachment types were parental sensitivity, so the mother's sensitivity and responsiveness to the child's needs. Those sensitive mums produced children through interaction that had these secure attachments, that knew they could rely on their mum. Even when she left, they would return, and when she returned, everything was okay. However, a lack of sensitivity produced these type A and type C children. So a type C child, her mum or his mum is inconsistent. Sometimes they are there for them and sometimes they feel that they are not. And as a result, when their mum leaves, they don't know how to act. Remember, when the mum returns to the room, the reason they were crying is because they should be upset because mum had left. And the solution to their problem is mother returning, but this doesn't solve their anxiety. The anxious avoidant types, they had a much looser attachment to their mother. And we'll see how this is characterised later in life when we look at the continuity hypothesis from these different attachment types. So evaluation of the study. Many researchers have argued that the strange situation lacks ecological validity. Essentially, it is an artificial laboratory setting, and it's not the same as how a child might behave in their own home or a natural environment such as nursery. Only assess the attachment type of the mum. What if these children were more attached to their father, grandparents, and so forth? We're classifying children as potentially being type C, but that just may be that the mother is not the primary attachment figure. Remember, let's go back to Schaefer and Emerson. Many children have multiple attachments, and many of those children also have primary attachments to someone other than the caregiver who provided physical care, in most cases the mum. Therefore, we can conclude a small proportion of these children would have had primary attachments elsewhere. Highly replicable study under controlled conditions. So one of the things that is good about Ainsworth's strange situation is that it's been replicated a multitude of times, probably thousands. Interestingly, there were other ways within the study that they tried to increase the internal validity. So they would have 2 observers for each observation. They could correlate their observations. So if they had high agreement, they would have a high inter-observer reliability. Go back to Meltzoff and Moore and Murray and Trevathan, where they used a similar method to ensure high reliability and validity of results. One limitation of the theory, not so much the study, but Ainsworth's conclusions, is that it may not be parental sensitivity and it may not be anything to do with the parents at all. In fact, it might be the temperament of the child. So Kagan argued that there were 3 different types of temperament: these easy babies, these difficult babies, and these slow to warm up. And he argued that this was linked to their temperament. Now, temperament is the biological basis for our personality. So it's not a personality in its entirety, but generally, are you someone who is relaxed and laid back, or are you slightly on edge? Kagan argued that a lot of the differences displayed between the children could have been because of that, and Fox supports him on this. Now, remember, this could be a feedback mechanism. If you're a difficult baby, your mother may be less responsive to your needs because she may be exhausted, you're crying all the time, you are needy, so she may try more extreme methods to detach you in a way from her. That could then feed in, so you start off with a difficult temperament and you become even more resistant over time because you are not being pushed away quite, but your mother is less responsive to you. Equally, an avoidant child who is naturally perhaps slow to warm up, their parent may give them more time because they don't want to pressure them into intimacy, or they may actually distance themselves. My child doesn't want to hug me, so I'll leave them to it. And that could actually exacerbate this. So remember, these 2 factors could work together to produce the findings that Ainsworth produced. Cross-cultural research from Van Isendorn and Wolf. De Wolf seemed to suggest that mother sensitivity is to some extent linked. So we have the 8 stages of Ainsworth's study. We're going to draw this out next time, and we will go through this again and watch some videos of how this works. And we've looked at Ainsworth's conclusions, her theory, and the evaluations of it. As always, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, and I will see you around.